received this jet, we had to actually grind out the gear mounts a little bit, because you'll see I stopped this in the right position. You can see how tight that clearance is. And when the gear was initially installed in the plane, it didn't even clear. So the mounts were not correctly angled so that this clears. So we basically just ground out the wood on both sides. And what happens is the gear comes in like that, and you want to, you know, move it in an angle, very slight angle like that. So you wind up grinding in the back there. You can see just a little bit in the back here and a little bit in the back here, so that the gear can sit like that. And we do that on both sides, and then at the end of it we find that the gear sits well. And in terms of where the gear is going to sit, what I found is on both sides, this front mount spot, you want the gear binding up right up against that former right there. So it'll bind up against this former on this, and obviously the same one on the other gear, and then you can see the gap on this other side. And with that angle is pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and mount these gear and then show you what that looks like when everything is done. Looking at the mounts for the gear on the L-39 XXL, and what I want to point out here is, so when I mounted the gear flush, what I found is that the gear kind of sat with the squat, like they were squatting out, and I didn't like that. So I'm gonna put a couple of washers on here. I guess 3 washers on each side, 3 under there, 3 under there. These are M4 washers, so that they lift the gear, so that it actually, instead of sort of sitting out like this, it actually comes more straight, because I think it'll just look better. So that's what I'm doing there. And we're going to insert the gear and mount it and see how we like the fit. Here you can see on the L-39 that we've installed 3 out of the 4 screws. And what I want to point out is this. So what comes in the kit is that screw right there. And as you can see, that barely bites into the wood. Let me put them on my hand like that. So we decided to change that out and get something actually longer that will bite into the wood. And also, because the gear is countersunk, you can see that right there, we're going to use countersunk screws, wood screws, in place of these button head ones. So that's the only change I made. We're going to install those and be done with it. Alright, so here's the final result-ish. You can see gear clears, comes up just fine. Final position, we might need to adjust the angle of this, but that's adjustable from the screw right there. And going down. Again, we clear. What's left now is obviously to clean up all this wiring. So all of the gear is going to come out, and I'm going to clean up the wiring and then finally install it for the last time in place. So here we have the main gear, and you can see I started pulling out some screws because this is how the jet comes stock. I just don't like the idea of metal going in through the wire like that. So we're going to take that off, and what we're going to wind up doing is something like this, where we put snake skin over it, put heat shrink on the end because chafe protection against that edge. We're going to route it around just like that and bring it up. I've reorganized the wires on my gear because I realized that they can't go in the front here, because when the gear folds, it actually folds into here. So we're going to route them back like that, and then route them with the rest of the wires in the jet like that. That way this is clear and there's nothing to pinch the wires. So here's the gear installed. You can see how the wiring was worked through all the way out the back and then down and under, and here's what we're dealing with. So let's actuate the gear so we can actually show how this is looking. So you can see how that line just extends and is completely out of the way. Now let's go gear down, and you can see that wire again just working its way all the way down, and the gear's in, no binding, no nothing. Got extra slack for the cable to move. So we have the L-39 XXL inverted here, and the goal is to try and figure out these gear door covers and how we're going to mount them. So in order to figure out where I'm going to drill, you can see what I did here, which is I just put some plastic screws into this receiving block here, which gets secured via a set screw that goes right in the middle there, and I position it as level as possible, and you can tell that by just looking at, you know, the top vis-a-vis the surface here. Drop some paint on top, put this gear door right where it's supposed to be with that one closed, and you can see just dab some green paint on top of those, and here's the result. So I have a good idea of where to drill those. So I'm going to drill that and then install that gear door flap for the gear door, and do the same for the piece that goes back here. Install it. So what I've done here is I've already drilled the holes on this landing gear plate, and I've mounted it temporarily. Made sure that as this closes, it clears that gap there, as well as the second piece that's a U-shaped piece, just making sure that the alignment of these three pieces works out. Now this piece needs to be secured. I'm thinking I'm going to use screws to secure this onto the fuselage, and how I'm going to do that is use tape to, once I like the fitment, which is this, I've already run the gear up and down and it works, secure with tape, and then I'm going to use a drill to drill a couple of holes on either side and maybe one on the back side here to secure that onto the lip that's underneath that piece, and I'll show you the result. So the 4 holes have been drilled, and what I'm going to be using is this kit of M2 screws, and I'm thinking probably the M2 by 6 or M2 by 8. These guys, very nice tiny screws. Drop them in there and they'll be out of sight and just disappear in there. So here's the final result. Let's actually zoom in real quick. I have mounted these the gear doors, and let's see if I can show that. As you can see, the screws there that hold that gear door cover in place, I've countersunk them. It just feels much nicer and flush. And now I'm going to show you the end result. So I figured I should show what the mechanism I'm using to attach this gear door piece is. So I have a M3 screw right there, and as you can see, like I said before, countersunk, and I'm just adding 3 washers and a plastic nut, and that gives me the correct spacing between that mounting block and sort of the edges here, so that the gear door fits tight. So just using that, and then that gets screwed into the hole. So I'm just obviously gonna unscrew these plastic M3 that I used to find the center hole or the center positions on the gear door cover, and then proceed from there. So we'll proceed with this, and if this doesn't work out, we'll probably think of something else. Maybe put a block of wood somehow, or figure out a different way to get the gap between this guy and the gear doors to work well. And you see that it clears really nicely. Gear comes up just fine. And then we're gonna draw up the gear. And it goes down just as expected and sits in place, and it's pretty tight. So for the most part, when this is flying, nothing's gonna interfere with the gear door. So we're gonna repeat this process on the other gear door. For the landing gear on the right, this is the left, that's the right. Working on installing test fitting the nose wheel, and this is how this goes in. So you gotta kind of tilt it at an angle. Yeah, there we go. And then that just kind of gets in place, and it's sat there. And the holes are already pre-drilled for you, so you can see the holes are already pre-drilled. And so we just need to. The blind nuts in the back? Yeah, it looks like they are blind nuts. Maybe they're the screws for holding the nose gear are these M4 by, looks like 29 millimeters long. You get 6 of them, and the blind nuts on the back side of the gear underneath this plate will hold those. So we're just gonna Loctite these and then drop them in place. Here we have the gear from the L-39 XXL, and what I'm gonna do is prep this gear. Basically, we're gonna take out all the screws, Loctite them on both sides. We're gonna Loctite all the set screws, and then we're gonna put sheathing or snakeskin over the wires and route them correctly in the plane, and then we're gonna reinstall the gear. Obviously, we also need to install the servo, and then we'll go from there. I'm pulling off these screws, and whereas they're tight, there doesn't seem to be any thread locker behind the screws, so it's a good thing that we checked, and we're gonna apply thread locker, blue stuff, and tighten everything back up. Alright, so we have the front landing gear pretty much buttoned up. So we just added snakeskin and kind of neatly routed all the wires, and I have tested that I can retract and extend the gear without any problems, and so all the wiring just comes out to the back, and now we can go and stick this in the jet. Now there's a couple of modifications that I found out that I had to do. So for starters, you see that this area right here has been ground down. It's not the same height as that side, and that's because that's where the servo arm, the steering arm actually kind of ran into, so we had to clear that. But also I just ground this around here a little bit. So around here, because it was a very tight fit, just to be able to get the gear in. And then again, we've seen this before. So here's our gear all ready to go, and we're gonna go and install it in the nose. And how we do that is basically you sneak through the front, just like that. I'm gonna pass all my wires under here. And get those coming through just like that. And then once that's done, we just work the gear in. Basically, it comes in from the top. The goal is to get that mounting pad over top, just like that. And then just work it into place. And now you can see why that was ground down, because as the gear turns, you need that room to actually be able to maneuver the servo arm. So modification that we had to do as we were retracting the gear, basically the servo arm interferes or contacts that former there, so you can see we just ground that down a little bit, and that's plenty. That's all we need. Landing gear, nose landing gear is installed, 6 bolts, Loctited, down and locked. And nose gear installation is pretty much done. So we just gotta do our wiring and finish that up. Alright, here's gear going up. Watch right here. That's why you need the clearance. Looking at the gear door servos on the XXL L-39, and you can see how we've mounted this basically with the spline in towards the plane. We actually had to get these elongated arms, or you can use the arms that come with the kit and then extend them yourself, but I found this to be much cleaner. And so what happens now is, let's close that gear door, close it all the way. And so now the door is pretty much closed, and if we go inside and look at the geometry, that is what we have. And I think I like that because a lot of the forces are now not going to be on the servo because of that angle. They're going to be actually on the arm, so that's perfect. The nose gear servo is installed. You can see there's already a pocket, and the servo just slides in there. Servo arm, and then you have your linkage, which then connects all the way to the gear door to allow you to move it, close and open. This is the nose gear door servo operating after we put the linkage correctly in. seems to work just fine. It feels like it needs another hinge here maybe, or some trimming, because it's grabbing right there. So I might go back and just trim the edge here just a little bit, but otherwise, because you can see there's a bit of a gap here, but it's not a gap there, so I might trim that.
What are they doing over here?
Gear doors closing. So we're gonna jump ahead a little bit here, just for the sake of showing the gear setup. So, as I said earlier, this jet comes with JP gear, basically a JP gear controller and a JP brake controller. However, we have opted out and installed the LGC19 Zykoa gear controller, and that comes with a screen right here. And so the gear that I just showed actuating is actually been programmed to work with this guy. And there's a couple of reasons why I chose this guy. One, it's way more adjustable. Two, the gear sequencing is pretty well done. But the biggest reason for me to go with this particular controller is that the gear, and I will talk about this later, the servos actually run off of a regulated power supply that comes off of the battery. So the battery here can be a 2S or a 3S. I think it allows up to 12 volts. And that's good, because if we find out that the 2S LiPo that we're currently using to power this is not sufficient, we can go up to like a 3S LiPo, depending on if the motors and the gear allow it or not. And the servos for the gear doors will all be regulated at 6 volts. So that's really cool. That allows us to go from 2S LiPo maybe to 3S LiPo, or maybe even a 3S LiPo if we need to. So that's the big one. And the programming for this is pretty straightforward. I do have a video on my previous L-39 BAJA, the smaller one, which is programmed very similarly to this one. But that's what we're using, not the stock stuff, but we got the LGC19, and I really like the setup.